Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about three women out of the book of Ruth, and it's about the heart condition revealed of faith and unbelief. I'm going to start with their names because meaning of names is so deep, and in the Hebrew culture, the word name actually means character. So Ruth actually means companion and friend, and Orpah means stiff-necked, and Naomi means delightful, beautiful, and pleasant. However, if we know the story of Ruth, it starts with Naomi and her husband leaving Israel because there was a severe famine. And they entered into a foreign country, which was Moab. And Moab is where their sons married two women, which were Ruth and Orpah, and they were from Moab. And then comes a horrible, horrible time in their lives where Naomi literally loses everything she loves. She loses her husband, and then she loses her two sons. And that's when her name actually becomes a different identity. And she takes on an identity of bitterness because her heart condition is so broken that she lives in her despair and she can't see a future anymore. And she just sees what's in front of her and the circumstances. She actually decides to no longer be Naomi, which is pleasant, delightful, and beautiful, but she calls her name Mara, which means bitterness. And in that already right there, we can see when something happens to us that is horrible, it is a shaking in our life, but we have to decide, are we going to run to the well of bitterness and be angry at God? Or are we actually going to run to the Lord and decide to make him our everything, no matter what? I'm talking from a place where I have been in complete brokenness. So I actually kind of identify with what Naomi went through. It is horrible. Your heart shatters in 1,000 pieces. But that's when you have to come to the place where you have to know who God is. Naomi, for a minute, was living in her grief, in her despair, and that heart had no hope, no future, and limited faith, actually. So while she did not fully abandon God, she struggled to see his provision in the midst of her suffering. And she probably believed that God was the reason all this happened to her. Naomi's heart condition was a spiritual and emotional state of bitter despair, often interpreted as temporary, intense struggle with unbelief, sorrow, and hopelessness. And in that heart condition, she challenged her daughter-in-laws, to not come with her going back to Israel because there was nothing left for Naomi in Moab, so she decided to go back to Israel. The famine was gone, so she just wanted to go back. Both daughter-in-laws wanted to come with her. And I'm sure both of them had heard a lot of stories about the God of Israel because they were married into that family they were of Hebrew background. And I believe they knew God. They knew who he was because Naomi and her family, that was their culture. They spoke about the God of Israel. And Orpah and Ruth both probably knew about God. And in that 10 years that they were with that family, they might have become believers of God. However, this great test takes place now because Naomi tells both of them, I'm going back, but you don't come with me because there's no future with me. I can't give you any son anymore. I'm too old. I'm only dry. There's no hope for me to ever give you a husband. There's no future. So Orpah for a minute says, I don't care, I want to go with you. But then the more Naomi says there's no future, Orpah's heart truly comes to the surface. Orpah decides to kiss Naomi goodbye and go back. So remember, Orpah's name means stiff-necked. God of Israel actually called the Israelites in the desert, you stiff-necked people, because they followed their own ways constantly, and they refused to believe God. Their mindset was still in Egypt. That's exactly how Orpah was. Her mindset was still Moab. Her mindset was familiarity over faith. Her decision to return to Moab and her God actually represents turning back to the familiar rather than moving forward in faith into the unknown. She chose the comfort of her past over a difficult future. So she actually had a divided heart, maybe even an unsaved heart, because she did not follow Naomi, and Naomi represented following God, the God of Israel. So she actually turned away from God. She went back to her own gods. We can actually read that in the book of Ruth, where Naomi says to Ruth after Orpah kissed her goodbye, went away. Here's what Naomi says to Ruth. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Follow your sister-in-law back home." But Ruth replies, this is powerful, "Stop urging me to abandon you, for wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God." So she makes a commitment right there. She actually already has made a commitment in her heart, because what came out of her mouth was already in her heart. She already made the commitment. I will go wherever you go because I believe in your God and I trust in your God. That God has a future for us, and I will cling to you. So we see here that Ruth actually has a loyal heart. She has the agape love. Agape is a word in Greek, and it is the highest form of love in Greek philosophy and in Christian theology, representing unconditional sacrificial love rather than just emotion. It is defined as a selfless commitment to the well-being of others, modeled by God himself. So it's a choice, it's an act of the will, not just a feeling or affection, often focusing on behaviors like patience, kindness, and humility. Ruth chose the road of faith. She chose the narrow path, in my opinion. She did not choose the path that was easy, but she chose the narrow path which leads to life. This is an example of that. She walked by faith and not by sight. She didn't know what the future will bring. So by doing this, she clung to Ruth. She was a servant to Ruth. She showed love to Ruth. And with that, Ruth's heart softened, and she was no longer bitter. And Ruth's vision grew again. And because of that, she was like, hey, there's Boaz. Boaz is he's our kinship. And with that, Ruth's reward and Naomi's reward was that God gave Boaz to Ruth as a husband, as the Redeemer. And out of that lineage, because Ruth was faithful, God gave Ruth and Boaz a son. His name was Obed. And Obed was the father of Jesse later. And Jesse was the father of David. And that is where God chose the lineage to come from, where Jesus Christ was born. That was the seed where Jesus Christ later on was born into. And that's the Redeemer. This is the redeeming of love story. Faith. Choose faith over circumstances. Look into the eyes of Jesus, and the reward will be powerful, because Ruth was blessed, Naomi was blessed, and that all because Ruth stood firm, even though she did not see and know what the future will bring. She stood because she had made a decision. She was not double-minded, but she chose the road that was not easy, but it became her absolute reward. Shalom.